Good morning, Rich Tyson here. This morning I'd like to spend a few minutes more talking about learning issues. In the last several videos that I've done, I've talked about the importance of being a learning leader and some specific principles regarding learning. Today I want to talk more about a process of teaching and training. This one I have used in the classroom, I've used with executives, and in fact, I've recently used it here on these videos. I haven't identified it, so I want to do that today. I utilize a proprietary model that I created some years ago. The acronym is PACER, and the P stands for principles or process. And the A is application, the C is commitment, the E is experience, the R is review and revise, and ultimately reward. So let's talk about each of these pieces of that PACER model for just a minute. Principles. Everything we teach is going to be based on a series of principles or a series of steps or phases through a process. If we're teaching somebody to run a machine on the plant floor, there's a process there and probably some underlying principles that people need to know to be safe, to be able to utilize it properly, and to crank out the kind of ultimate product that we want. So those principles and that process are very important. I mentioned that I've used this technique recently where I talked about Ralph Waldo Emerson, where he said there are three important principles to learning. And if you will recall, he said the first one is to get out in nature and observe what's going on, get out into the world around you, understand what's going on, where your customer pain is, and so forth. Well, this was a principle taught by Ralph Waldo Emerson in the 19th century, actually. And again, a brilliant man. But that principle is illustrated or applied. This is the A of the PACER model, is applied very liberally by a company called IDEO. And I mentioned them, where they are very much into observing what's going on around us. And so it's the first principle of learning for them, learning what needs to be fixed, what needs to be improved on, and so forth. And so the story of IDEO is an application of the principle of observing. The second principle that Ralph Waldo Emerson talked about was reading, studying the great books, and so forth. And as I look at that, I'm a bit of the application of that principle myself because I read all the time and I'm looking at what experts say about a variety of things and how they apply principles and so forth. And so I am an application of the principle of reading, and there are many others that are probably even much better examples of that than I am. But I have my own story, if you will, which is the application of the principle. And then the third key principle that I taught was from Ralph Waldo Emerson again, was to get out in the world and do things, to not just observe, but to get engaged, to try things out, to see what's going on by virtue of your own experience. And so I've talked about that in one of my recent videos that I've done and articles I've written. I've talked about taking a group of executives on a rappelling trip where we got them through the process of actually doing things. We had them see what we were doing first so they could understand how experts would do it. We told them what we were doing as we did it, but then we had them do it and explain what they were doing. And they did it on a variety of lower key types of things. Well, that was the experience that we created for them to experience the principle, the process, and to have their own application, if you will, of what was going on. So let's go back to the PACER model again. It's principles and a process often, and then it's also application, and then critical centerpiece is commitment. Well, what do we mean by commitment? Well, so often we as teachers or in selling things, we sell the benefits. We teach our classes, if you'll just do these things, if you'll apply these principles and these processes, you're going to get good outcomes. That is selling the benefits, and that's important. But one of the things we often fail to do is we fail to have the learner understand the costs that need to be paid, the price that needs to be paid in order to achieve the outcome. When we look at New Year's resolutions, for instance, why do they so often fail? We see the benefits of regular exercise and better diet, but why do they fail? Well, there's a price to be paid. There's a cost, if you will. And if we're not willing to pay that cost, if we don't see that the benefit is greater than the cost, then we're going to have a hard time keeping that commitment. And so it behooves us as teachers and trainers to say, okay, you've seen the principle, the process, you've seen the application or the story of it, how other people have done it. Those are the benefits. You see how it can succeed for you. But let's talk now about what's the cost. How much money might have to be invested? What are we talking in terms of equipment, resources, maybe other teachers that we need to bring into it? What is the cost for me? Do I have to get out of bed a little earlier in the morning? Do I have to behave differently than I have? Do I have to get rid of some bad habits and replace them with good habits? Those are all costs that have to be paid in order to move forward. Um, Angela Duckworth wrote a book called Grit, and grit is a function of those who actually make the commitment and achieve. And she says you got to have a passion for things, you got to really want it. But then, secondarily, you have to have the perseverance to keep moving forward, to keep paying the price to get to where you want to go. So, this commitment piece is the centerpiece of that PACER model. Again, principles, application, commitment, and then experience. When you've taught somebody something, then they need to be able to go out into the real world and experience it or get their hands on with an operating process or something else so that they can experience it themselves. When I first created this model, I was a little nervous about it. It made sense to me, but I was also concerned that once they'd had the experience, maybe the principle didn't work for them. Maybe they had a bad experience with it. And I thought, wow, that's going to make me look like a charlatan because they didn't get the same results as somebody else might have with these principles or processes. What I've learned, however, is that often great success with a principle right out of the chute is a random event. The fact is, so often what we need to do is to have the mistakes, have the errors, have us fall short, and then analyze why that happened. Figure out how we can revise our behavior, how we can strengthen our commitment, and how we can have a better experience. And so, as teachers, as trainers, we need to understand that it's important for us to be able to look at a failure or a shortcoming that a learner might have with an experience and have them recognize that that's part and parcel to the learning process. That's part of a learning curve. And so rather than being upset with them or with ourselves because that principle wasn't learned well or it didn't work effectively initially, it's to be patient, to recognize that the experiences will build one on another, and over time, they will begin to create great results. So then that leads us to the R again. That is where we review how well the experience went, revise where we need to, and again, ultimately, as things begin to work on a consistent basis, we reward. We make sure that that learner gets congratulated, gets reinforced that what they're doing is working well. So let's go back through those principles one more time. The first one, again, is the principle itself, the processes, whatever you're trying to teach, whether it's cognitive or whether it's physical, that those principles are clear. The application then is the second piece where it's showing where somebody else has done it. By the way, sometimes we may start our teaching process by telling the story or showing the application before we talk about the principle so that the learner can grasp that great story. Stories will engage people. And if they can see how somebody else did something great and then we identify the principles, that is a great discovery learning process. So don't fail to understand that sometimes you might want to tell the story before you get into the principle. You might want to share the application before the principle. Again, commitment is the third key piece. Costs are going to have to be paid. Are the benefits felt to be greater than the cost? And how do we reinforce the fact that costs have to be paid on an ongoing basis? We have to persevere. And so it's really important that we understand that This isn't a one-time deal. This isn't an event, it's a process. And those costs have to be paid consistently to get the benefits that we're after. Then we lead to experience. It's go out and have that great experience, try something out, fail if you will. Often the great principle is fail fast to fail forward. And so let's go ahead and have the failure, review it, figure out what we're doing. This does not absolve the trainer here at all. In fact, when you get that feedback, your responsibility as a training leader is to make sure that you review completely with that learner what the experience was, where they failed, and how they might get better, and for them to know that you sustain them in their learning. And finally, the R again is that regular review process, revise where you need to, and continue to move forward until you can reward great behavior, great outcomes, real competency that is developed as a result of the process. So thank you very much this morning. This is such an important principle in my life. As a business coach, I use this all the time. Again, recognize the importance of patience. This isn't something where you just slam dunk it. It's going to take some time, both for you as a trainer and for your people as learners. But the PACER learning model, the PACER training model, use both names for it, is something that I've found to be very effective, and I commend it to you. And thank you so much for your time.